Ilara sighed, leaning back in her chair. The hours stretched endlessly, and her mind began to wander again. She was startled by the sound of the door sliding open. Turning, she saw her colleague, Ensign Ryland Trent, stepping into the cockpit with a tray in his hands. "Hey, Ilara," Ryland said, a note of weariness in his voice. "I brought you some rations. Figured you could use a break." Ilara groaned inwardly, but forced a smile. "Thanks, Ryland. I appreciate it." Ryland sat down opposite her, placing the tray on the control panel. They both stared at the unappetizing food packets in silence for a moment. "Do you ever wonder," Ilara began, poking at the gelatinous substance on her tray, "how they managed to make space rations taste so terrible? I swear I'd rather eat the packaging." Ryland chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, it's like they intentionally make it bad so we don't overeat. You'd think with all our advancements, they'd figure out how to make a decent meal." Ilara nodded, taking a reluctant bite. "It's almost like they want us to suffer. Remember that one time they tried to introduce gourmet rations? Those were a disaster." Ryland laughed. "Oh, don't remind me. The luxury beef stew tasted like rubber. I'd rather stick to these bland bricks." They ate in companionable silence for a while, the conversation a welcome distraction from the monotony of their shift. Eventually, Ilara spoke again. "Do you think we'll ever get real food out here?" she mused, staring out at the stars. "Something fresh, something that doesn't taste like it was made in a lab?" Ryland shrugged. "Maybe one day, but for now I guess we're stuck with this. At least it keeps us alive." Ilara sighed, finishing her meal. "Yeah, I suppose. Just another challenge of life in space, right?" Ryland nodded, gathering up the empty trays. "Exactly. Hang in there, Ilara. We're all in this together." As Ryland left, Ilara returned to her post, feeling a little lighter. Despite the terrible food and the endless nights, it was moments like these, shared with her fellow crew members, that made it all bearable. Ilara watched as Ryland disappeared down the corridor, the doors sliding shut behind him with a soft hiss. The quietness enveloped her again, but this time it felt a bit less oppressive. She knew that in a few hours, Ryland would be back for his own shift at the navigation controls, and they'd likely share another brief conversation to break the monotony. Leaning back in her chair, she pulled up the ship's status logs on her display. Everything was still functioning within normal parameters, the shield generators humming steadily as they maintained the protective barrier around the Nova. Ilara's fingers danced over the holographic interface, running a few diagnostic checks to pass the time. Her thoughts drifted to the conversation she used to have with her family before she embarked on this mission. They had shared her excitement about exploring the unknown, but there was always a hint of concern in their eyes, a worry that couldn't be hidden. Ilara had reassured them, promising to stay safe and return home with stories of her adventures. Now, as she gazed out at the stars, she wondered if she'd ever have those stories to tell. So far, her time on the Nova had been mostly uneventful, the days blending into nights as she performed her duties. The vastness of space was both awe-inspiring and daunting, a reminder of how small and fragile they were in the grand scheme of things. A soft beep from the control panel brought her back to the present. The diagnostics had completed, and everything was still in order. Ilara sighed, stretching her arms above her head. She had learned early on that maintaining focus during these long shifts was crucial, but it was also important to take breaks and let her mind wander. She reached for her personal tablet, pulling up a novel she had been reading. It was a story about explorers on a distant planet, facing challenges and discovering wonders beyond their imagination. As she immersed herself in the tale, the hours seemed to pass more quickly, the isolation of the cockpit fading into the background. Eventually, the door slid open again, and Rylan returned, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the control panel. He looked tired, but there was a spark of determination in his eyes that Elara admired. "Ready for the shift change?" he asked, giving her a tired smile. Elara nodded, closing her tablet and standing up. "Yeah, all systems are green. It's been a quiet night." Rylan took her place at the shield array controls, quickly scanning the status displays. "Good to hear. Hopefully, it'll stay that way." Elara lingered for a moment, watching as Rylan settled into the chair. Despite the hardships and the challenges, there was a camaraderie among the crew that made it all worthwhile. They were in this together, facing the unknown with courage and determination. "Take care, Rylan," she said, giving him a nod. "I'll see you at the next shift." Rylan returned the nod, a hint of a smile on his lips. "You too, Elara. Get some rest." As Elara left the cockpit, the familiar hum of the ship's engines accompanied her down the corridor. She made her way to the crew quarters, the faint glow of the ship's interior lighting guiding her path. It was time to rest and recharge, to prepare for another night in the endless expanse of space. Entering her quarters, Elara let the door slide shut behind her with a gentle hiss. She glanced around the small but cozy space. Her bunk was neatly made, the standard issue blanket and pillow waiting for her. A small shelf held a few personal items, a framed photo of her family, a couple of paperbacks, and a small potted plant she had managed to keep alive despite the less than ideal conditions. She sighed, feeling the weight of the long shift lift slightly from her shoulders. Elara removed her uniform jacket, hanging it carefully in the small closet. She sat on the edge of her bunk, unlacing her boots and setting them aside. The cool air of her quarters was a welcome contrast to the stuffy cockpit. Elara reached for her personal tablet again, deciding to finish the chapter of her novel before trying to sleep. She lay back against her pillow, the tablet propped on her knees. The story of explorers on a distant planet drew her in once more, and she found herself lost in the pages, her mind transported to another world. After a while, her eyes grew heavy, the words on the screen beginning to blur. She set the tablet aside and turned off the small reading light, plunging the room into a soft darkness. The gentle hum of the ship's engines was now the only sound, a comforting lullaby that eased her tired mind. Elara closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She allowed herself to relax completely, sinking into the mattress. Her thoughts drifted back to the conversations with Rylan, the shared laughter over terrible rations, and the camaraderie that made the isolation bearable. In the quiet of her quarters, she could almost feel the presence of her fellow crew members, each of them facing their own challenges and finding their own ways to cope with the endless expanse of space. It was this sense of unity, of shared purpose, that brought her comfort. As she lay there, her breathing slowed and her thoughts became less coherent. Images of distant stars and uncharted planets filled her mind, blending with memories of home. The soft hum of the ship seemed to sync with her heartbeat, creating a rhythm that lulled her closer to sleep. Elara's last conscious thought was one of quiet determination. Despite the hardships, the monotony, and the moments of doubt, she was part of something greater. Together with her crew, she was exploring the unknown, pushing the boundaries of human experience. It was a journey filled with challenges, but also with moments of profound beauty and discovery. With that thought, Elara drifted off to sleep, the darkness of her quarters enveloping her in a peaceful embrace. The Starship Nova continued its voyage through the stars, carrying its crew toward whatever adventures lay ahead. And in the quiet of her bunk, Lieutenant Elara Kane found a moment of rest, her dreams filled with the promise of the unknown.